Hello, welcome to the Microsoft Online Tech Forum. My name is Dan Stevenson, and I'm here to talk to you about Microsoft Teams for industries. I've been working in Microsoft Teams for about 5 years now, starting with an incubation project that eventually became this very popular and widely used product. I spent several years leading engineering work for Teams, building core features for Teams and channels and identity and IT admin and free version and education and all these great things. And now I live in Asia and lead our engineering team that supports customers across Asia to get the most value they can out of Teams. Today we're going to talk about specific scenarios for Teams in different industries and see how companies and organizations like schools and governments are using Teams to achieve great things for their employees. First, I want to give you a brief overview and refresher on Microsoft Teams so we're all on the same page. Then let's dive in and talk about Teams for different industries like retail and manufacturing and so on. We'll talk about a little bit of information of the features that we just saw so you can go off and check these out. And then we'll recap and talk about next steps. So first, Teams is built around chat. Chat is the ability to have a fast, informal communication among a group of people. In Teams, we provide chat in a group chat feature, as well as a little more structured around something we call teams and channels, which is where you can get a project team or even a larger department together to have more structured and ongoing conversations. Very complementary to chat communication is online meetings. This is the ability to share your screen, present your video, even swap out your background, share, collaborate, communicate with people in real time, no matter where they are. Of course, we also have calling in Teams because Teams is the successor to Skype for Business. So Teams is your phone, on your PC, and on the many devices that we support as well. Files is a critical part of Teams. This is about collaborating and sharing and co-authoring files from SharePoint and OneDrive with your colleagues and making sure that the right information is always available at your fingertips. And lastly, Teams is actually an operating system. We built Teams from the ground up to be extensible and support hundreds of integrations available in our App Store, as well as thousands of applications, that actually probably tens of thousands of applications, that our customers and partners have been building to extend and customize Teams for their own use. So you can bring in workflows and dashboards and project management and alerts and notifications and all sorts of interesting applications connected directly into Teams. So what does Teams do for you? Well, first, Teams fundamentally changes the way people work and communicate. It flattens and democratizes the workforce, enabling everybody to participate no matter where they are or what platform they're on. It helps you cut across organizational boundaries and enable people to work together on the right projects at the right time. Second, Teams really streamlines your business processes. This is about taking application data, apps, other services, and bringing those directly to where the employees, where the end users are, so that they can view and respond and collaborate right where all their colleagues are. Portals, dashboards, apps all come alive in Teams in a way that they never have before. Third, Teams gives you this great value of having the same or similar experience across many different platforms. We have millions of users who are primarily using Teams on their mobile phone, which is great. We also support a wide range of room devices and displays, as well as personal peripherals and devices. And even some really cool devices I'll talk about later, specifically for retail or manufacturing. And then this would not be part of Microsoft 365 and Office 365 if Teams did not also provide enterprise-grade security and compliance. Every message sent in Teams is archived and can be searched for legal hold or retention or other compliance reasons. All important events in Teams are audited. Teams supports multi-factor authentication, strong controls over guest access, and very detailed policies to control meetings and messaging and calling and applications, so you can rest assured that you have a very secure cloud-based experience. So what are people actually doing with Teams? Well, here are some examples, along with a pointer, to a few different types of scenarios by different industries, whether scenarios from marketing or sales or information technology, project management, engineering, lots of different ways that people around the world for the last several years have been getting great value out of Teams. You can click on that link and dive in a little more detail. But I want to go now specifically to our first industry, which is retail. And what Teams does in retail in terms of empowering the first-line workers, the people right on the front line of interacting with customers, empowering them and digitally enabling store operations. Let's talk about some important scenarios for Teams in retail. First, improving employee engagement and retention. This is about getting people to communicate better, to feel connected with the company. You know, a lot of times I go into stores to talk about Teams or look at how they're doing their operations. And the primary way that they communicate with staff is through a piece of paper pinned on the wall, or maybe something that comes in on a weekly mail drop. Teams gets the right information and the right connectivity directly to those first-line workers. And it's the exact same platform that's used in the back office and in the boardroom, which means you can have a combined continuous communications loop engaging all employees in the company. Our retail customers also use Teams to push the right information out to employees, whether that's training and education material or product information that needs to get out there right away to help customers. You can use Teams to manage employee schedules and tasks. You can use it to manage projects and action plans. It's a great platform for getting everybody on the same page. You can even do some really cool integrations in Teams specifically for retail around things like managing inventory or supply chain or getting shipment updates. The screen on the right here shows one of our task features, which gives you the ability to push a task out to multiple different stores, for example, and track completion that way. Let's double click on a few of the more interesting scenarios here. First, let's talk about communications. Now we have this really cool new feature. It's just in preview now. It's called Walkie-Talkie. Walkie-Talkie creates a persistent communications channel that is open to everybody who wants to connect to it. They actually don't even need to be in the same physical store. You could have a walkie-talkie channel that connects across multiple stores, even around the world, because it's using our service. It's not using a local radio. So if I have my phone here that has been set up for using walkie-talkie within Teams, and all I have to do is push and send a quick message out and see if anybody's listening. Looks like nobody's listening right now. Everybody's off doing work. But you can get the idea around having this great push-to-talk experience within Teams. We've partnered with Samsung on a really cool phone that they're building, and we also have support for push-to-talk headsets like the one in the picture there. Let's talk about some other useful communications scenarios for retail within Teams. First, urgent messages. This lets you send a message to somebody that sends an alert every 2 minutes for 20 minutes. It's very powerful. It can really get people's attention. Of course, you need to be responsible about how you use it, and you do have, from the IT perspective, the ability to control who can send those messages. If somebody responds promptly, perhaps you want to give them some praise. So we have some really cool praise stickers built into Teams to improve employee satisfaction and engagement. We also have some capabilities for pushing out announcements, whether cross-posting to multiple teams or communicating directly to every employee in the company with a very richly formatted chat message. And as I mentioned earlier, you can even do some really interesting app integrations like this inventory bot, which you could use to process a customer question about inventory and then find out where a product is and even show the customer the map to where that is within the store. This is another example of an inventory scenario that you could do within Teams. You can see here there's a bot interface, essentially a chat bot, that's connecting to a back-end inventory system. We can use that to track and update our stock. And we even have the ability to have a dashboard or a spreadsheet that shows us the overall inventory tracking. We do all this inside Teams, so it's directly available to the employees, and the security is managed so that it's only for the people who are supposed to have access to it. So it's a very convenient and secure way to connect your employees to these types of back-end sources. Now, one of our most recent updated features is around task management. This is really the ability to create some important complex tasks, like maybe updating some store collateral, and then pushing that out to every single store, or maybe a subset of the stores, and giving them all the ability to act on it and then respond. Let's take a look and see what that looks like in real life. Okay, so I'm a district manager for a retail chain here, logged in and trying to manage my tasks that I want to assign to all the different stores we have around the world. And so you can see I had a few tasks from the previous week, but let's go to week 2 here. You can see all these tasks that I sent out to the different stores, each in a different region perhaps, and I can choose which tasks get sent to which places. And then within that, I get to see the completion percentage as well, so I can see whether or not the staff in a particular store has completed that action. Now let's code over to the phone, and this is my phone. I'm working retail, on the weekends. And you can see here, I'm in Teams. Teams looks a little different for me. I only have chat, tasks, and shifts. This is because my IT department has set up a policy, so I get a simplified version of Teams as a retail worker. But let's go over to tasks here, and I can see maybe some tasks that are assigned to me. Looks like I've got one I have to do around updating a mannequin, so let's go ahead and mark that off. And I'm also overdue on stocking some of the display racks, so we'll go ahead and complete that as well. So this way, anybody in the store, anybody across the world can quickly update their task status and have it reflected back in the overall tracking system. So that was tasks. Great scenario for retail in Teams. Now let's talk about how some customers are using Teams within retail. This is an example from Isetan Mitsukoshi in Tokyo, Japan. They're a cousin of a store we have here called Xinguang Sanyue. Isetan Mitsukoshi is a luxury high-end retailer, and they have some retail staff called concierges who go around and help out customers in some of their boutiques. They provide product information, restaurant recommendations, that kind of thing. What we did in partnership with Isetan Mitsukoshi is equip those concierges with Teams with relevant product and restaurant information updated regularly so that they could provide the most up-to-date information to customers and enabled those store staff to communicate with each other. You can see here when we zoom in, they're running Teams on their phone, accessing the right product and other information to share with customers. So how do we get started for Teams for retail? Well, first, we like to think about doing a pilot. Usually we start with 1 or 2 stores or 1 or 2 departments. Deploy and configure Teams. Make sure you set up the right policies so the first line workers have the appropriate apps enabled in Teams, like tasks and shifts, but maybe hide or disable some of the others, like calls or meetings, if they're not relevant for them. Make sure you get licensing, and of course there are some free ways to get Teams right away. Set up your teams and channels for your stores and departments. Set up your project schedules using shifts so that you can start getting great value out of Teams right away. You can even look at integrating applications for inventory management or operational systems, and then start looking at deploying personal and shared devices. For example, the Samsung walkie-talkie device that I mentioned, or other headsets and handsets that we have available. You'll see some links on the right there telling you about getting access to the Shifts app and some tips for shift workers and teams, as well as more details on retail scenarios and the walkie-talkie and other features coming up. So let's switch gears to a different industry, manufacturing. And let's understand what Teams can do for manufacturing to help enable communications and collaboration in the Industry 4.0 era. What are some of the relevant scenarios in manufacturing? Some of them are similar to what we saw for retail, but some of them are a little bit different. First, accelerating decision-making and ensuring really good alignment between different departments, different production lines, different roles, different offices, even different countries. Manufacturing today is a very complex process. It's very easy to create, even accidentally, silos and compartments between different organizations or different departments. Something like Teams will really help cut across that with really effective cross-group collaboration. Another key value point here is simply reducing travel costs. Manufacturing operations are often global, even within a country, distributed over many locations. Having online meetings and Teams meeting room devices can really help manufacturing companies keep people working and engaged on site, but still connected with their colleagues across the city, across the country, or around the world. A really great way to get integration value out of Teams is to tie in factory automation systems, sensors, and controls through our very extensible API so that you can have messages, notifications, and dashboards show up to help manage complex manufacturing systems. And when there's a problem, for example, send an alert directly to the people who need to be responsible for that. And of course, because Teams is an open collaboration platform with secure access for external parties, you can also use it to collaborate with your distributors, your suppliers, your channel partners, anybody else out in your broader industry ecosystem, all using the same platform in Teams. So let's talk about what some of that looks like in real life. Well, here's what team collaboration could look like. We have a group of people who are working on a product together, and they want to share some information about whether or not they have the right stress test report. They've shared a document within the team, and they're using our @mention feature to send a specific notification to one of their colleagues. And this works across mobile or desktop. Another example here is inventory management. We showed a little bit on the retail side about tracking inventory in the store. Well, inventory and supply chain management is just as important in manufacturing. A lot of times there are already dashboards and systems in place, but they're not always accessible or widely used. By bringing those into Teams, using integrations like Power BI, for example, or even just regular Excel, you can bring that information directly to where it matters, to the users who need to act on it and need to react to it, observe it, respond, escalate, etc., all right there inside Teams. Now, this is a cool scenario around schedule management. It applies to manufacturing. It also applies to retail, but I thought I'd talk to you about it here when we're talking about some of these other manufacturing scenarios. With schedule management in Teams, you can create shifts and then make those available to teams of employees in different departments or sites or stores. The employees can be assigned shifts. They can even take open shifts or swap or request shifts, and they can even clock in and clock out. Let's take a look at how that actually works. Okay, so here I am back in Teams again. Now, I'm a shift supervisor, so I have a shift schedule created for different employees in different departments. I can set open shifts, I can assign shifts, I can even take one of these shifts and edit it or delete it or even copy and paste it across the schedule. Then I'll publish that updated schedule and my employees can then sign in and take a shift. Let's see what it looks like as an employee. Here in Teams on my phone, I see that I've got a shift schedule. I can look at my open shifts and see that I've got some that I could take if I wanted. And I can even clock in and clock out, so we're able to track employee time and replace the punch clock. Okay, so that was the shifts application, both for a supervisor and for an employee. Now let's talk about how a company is using Teams for manufacturing out in the real world. This is Alcoa. They're an aluminum mining and manufacturing company. And they have a plant in Iceland that is mining aluminum 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They deployed Teams in this very heavy-duty manufacturing environment for scenarios like employee communications around the clock. They have employees coming on and off shift all day long. And they want to make sure that the employee who's managing a piece of equipment or a particular process is able to communicate status to the next employee on shift in that particular station and keep that going. So they actually use chats and channel messages to keep a steady stream of communications available across the different shifts that they have. Of course, they're also using schedule management in the Shifts app in Teams, which is a really nice upgrade from what they had before, which was essentially a whiteboard with sticky notes. So how do you get started using Teams for manufacturing? Well, first, just like with retail, we encourage you to pilot, maybe with a factory or the floor in a particular factory or department, or maybe a project. Get the right licenses and setup for Teams, create the right teams and channels. If there are factory workers, frontline workers involved, create shift schedules for managing them as well. Add and build the right applications from your manufacturing process tools or factory automation systems or any dashboards that you have. Very easy to add and integrate those into Teams. And then think about what devices you want to have out there as well. We recently announced a ruggedized wearable headset that functions as kind of like a heads-up display with Teams, with a hard hat and everything else to be fully ruggedized, that you can wear into very extreme manufacturing and mining and other types of situations. There's some resources linked to on the right there. How to use shift management, some tips for shift workers, and some manufacturing scenarios, as well as information about some of these devices. So let's go next to the healthcare industry. How can we use Teams in healthcare to connect employees across different functions and ultimately improve outcomes for patients? Here are some of the very relevant scenarios for Teams in healthcare. First, staff collaboration, enabling members of a medical team to collaborate consistently and securely around the clock, asynchronously and real time. Often these situations are called health team huddles. It's the opportunity for a group of people, doctors, nurses, diagnosticians, other clinical staff, to get together and communicate about a particular project or patient or some incident or issue going on within their environment. Second is actually working with entering patient data and viewing and updating patient data inside of Teams. We have an app in Teams called Patients that we built, which connects to your electronic health record systems and will pull in and allow you to update patient information. And then thirdly, it's pretty natural to think about using a product like Teams for telehealth or online video conferencing between a physician and a patient. And we have a great new feature to enable that called virtual consults. So let's take a look about what that means from some scenarios. First, patient management. This is the Patients app inside of Teams. You can use this app to see all the patients pulled from the EHR system and edit and update that information directly inside of Teams. Because we are using an industry standard protocol for connecting to EHRs, we're compatible with almost every existing system out there. And a lot of partners have built additional integrations to enable Teams within this environment. You can also use Teams to send very urgent communications to staff. For example, sending out a message to everybody in the organization when there's a high-risk incident going on. We have an app, an integration called Company Communicator, which makes it very easy to do that. We also have support for urgent messages, which I talked about earlier, that sends a message to somebody every 2 minutes until they respond. And it's important also to know that anything you send in a Teams message, including a photo that is taken with the camera built into Teams, is safe and secure inside the Teams service. We do not store those images on the device, even if it's a company-managed device. Another interesting scenario for Teams collaboration within healthcare is clinical trials. Clinical trials is really just a type of project with a lot of tasks and inputs, some data, some project management on top of that, And so here you can see an example of using Teams to manage the tasks using Microsoft Planner, which is a Kanban-style project board, and then also using a dashboard, like in Power BI, to visualize and track the results of that clinical trial. A very straightforward collaboration scenario that can be done inside of Teams. And then, of course, telehealth. The ability to schedule an online conference with a patient, with somebody outside of the organization, and do that in a user-friendly way so that they feel they are having a high-quality, branded experience as they engage with their healthcare provider. Here's some examples of some healthcare organizations that are using Teams. Saiseikai Kumamoto Hospital in Japan is using Teams for care team coordination, schedule management, and disaster communication. This is a great example of a hospital being able to use Teams in a number of different scenarios. This is the National Health Service in the UK. They've deployed Teams at scale, and they are using it for a number of different cases like virtual team meetings, pre-clinic discussions, clinical training. They're using it as a virtual pager. You can see how that would work with urgent messages, for example. And they're also now using telehealth capabilities for patients who are under quarantine or isolation, especially elderly patients who may not have access to a device provided by their hospital or healthcare provider. You can also see a quote here from the Director of Technology at the NHS about some of the capabilities they're now leveraging within Teams. So how do we get started for Teams for healthcare? Well, I think a good way to start is to actually use it internally. Use it for some staff meetings and staff communications. Create a few sharing channels or project groups. Build up that familiarity and comfort level with using Teams as a communications platform inside the organization. Hospitals have and healthcare providers have very complex staffing arrangements sometimes. So Teams shifts capability is a great way to manage and coordinate that. The Patients app does require you to integrate with your EHR. Many hospitals have already done this, other healthcare providers as well. That's a good later step to take to now think about bringing patients' data directly into your communications platform. You can always look at setting up telehealth interactions using virtual consults. And as you build up your integrations with Teams, you have access to Power BI dashboards and other tools that you can integrate as applications for healthcare into Teams. Some links on the right there, good information about using Teams for healthcare. Also, crisis communications in the healthcare environment, really important, relevant, and recent scenario. Integrating with an EHR, how to tie your electronic health record system into the Patients app inside Teams. Shift management and telehealth resources, as well as some more information on healthcare scenarios to get you started. Okay, so now let's go to a slightly different industry, from the office to the classroom, and talk about Teams for education and how Teams can improve online learning and professional development for educators. Before I get into that, I want to show you just a few images from a recent Teams onboarding in the United Arab Emirates, where they moved all student learning into Teams with great success. We now have, because of the ongoing health situation, a lot of need for online learning, and this is a great example where a government ministry was able to very quickly, with our support, move education into Teams. And it's something we hope to replicate in many different areas around the world. So what are some of the scenarios that are relevant in education? Well, a very obvious one is class collaboration and class teams. We have a built-in feature in Teams to create a team for each class. You can add a class notebook to that team. You can even have assignments and grading features as well. These days, another very relevant feature is distance learning or online learning. The ability to share teaching and a lesson and student interaction over a video conference, or even broadcast out to hundreds or thousands of students. And of course, let's not forget about teacher professional development. The ability for teachers of a particular subject to share tips and tricks, lesson plans, other content, even if they're not in the same school, maybe not even the same district or same university, but they're still able to collaborate and communicate within teams. This is an example of how the assignments and grading app works in Teams, where a student or a group of students can collaborate on an assignment that is published or proposed by the teacher, and then they submit that, and the teacher is able to review and grade that assignment and send that feedback directly to the students. Now, I actually remember it was late 2016 when I was running some of the core engineering work within Microsoft Teams, even before we launched officially. And we met with a team that was building these great features around assignments and class notebook. And they had a separate product. And we said, you know, they're looking for a collaboration platform. We were looking for some great industry use cases. And so we very quickly got together, and within a few months, we released the very first version of Teams for Education. So I'm very happy to see this grow up now. And in fact, my own kids have grown up, and now my daughter is messaging me in Teams for Education, which is kind of a nice conclusion of that particular story arc. Here's a cool scenario that came out of one of our best customers. It's a university in Australia, where they built a question bot that is self-training, self-learning. Students ask a question, and other students or proctors or TAs help provide answers and vote on the right answer. And so it builds up this corpus of knowledge over time that can be used within a class. It's a great application. It's available online for any educational institution to deploy within their own environment. And it uses Teams both for chatting and for ranking and rating the answers, because that's exactly where the students are when they're doing their work. Let's look at some examples of universities and schools that are using Teams. Hong Kong Polytechnic was able, in a very short period of time, to move 100% to online learning, using Teams both for regular meetings and for Teams live events, which is a large-scale broadcast feature in Teams that is great for up to 10,000 people to attend and view some kind of a training or a webinar or an online class. Two other examples that I really like are from Japan. The first one is the elementary school attached to Chiba University. And in very short order, with very little notice, they were self-organized into moving their learning online. They started out with homeroom and a few basic things. Now they have cooking classes and all sorts of cool things going on. And I love that picture there because it's a first grade homeroom. There's no students there, they're all at home, but they're still talking to the teacher online using Teams. And then this one here, Ritsumeikan Primary School was able to use Teams for their graduation. They used live events and broadcast the graduation ceremony to people who were attending from home and not able to come in because of the ongoing health situation. So that's a great example of how you can use Teams in education to be very adaptive to changing circumstances. How to get started using Teams in your school or university? Well, get your school set up in Teams, and we have a tool called School Data Sync that makes it really easy to do that from very common systems, and there's a link on the right to that. Second, a really easy way to get started is just have teachers communicate. Set up for the faculty and staff some core collaborations. We have templates built into Teams for Education to create professional learning community teams, for example. So it's a great way to get some of those users, some of those employees engaged in Teams right away. You get the student accounts set up and you provision your class teams, and now you've got a secure chat workspace for every classroom. We also have some really good security controls to manage things like student chat and student access to make sure that students are not doing, frankly, inappropriate or dangerous things that they would like to do, but we make sure Teams is able to block that. You can host large events and webinars and online sessions, and over time you can bring in other content. For example, if a publisher has an application that you want to pin into Teams, you can do that, and now that application with all that publisher's content is available in every class, to every teacher, and every student. On the right, there's information about the School Data Sync, about Teams for Education scenarios, and that question bot I showed you earlier from Australia, a really great way to build some cool AI directly into your online learning. So the last industry that I want to talk about is government, and how can Teams help government agencies be more effective in serving citizens? The picture here in the background is actually the San Francisco Board of Supervisors that held their first ever online meeting using Teams and simultaneously broadcast out over television. This is a really cool scenario, obviously happening because of some of the ongoing situations that are not so cool, but it's nice to see that they were able to turn to Teams and still reach out to their citizens and still enable that type of function in a government. So what are some of the other scenarios that governments can use in Teams? Well, an easy one is just collaborating across agencies. Governments, like companies, have lots of different departments, different silos, and compartmentalized information and functions. And cross-team, cross-group collaboration is a very powerful way to achieve new outcomes. Having a common platform like Teams helps them do that. Of course, in addition to collaborating, they want to share information and share resources. Governments have a lot of data, dashboards and citizen information and updated documents they want to share with the public, perhaps on healthcare. Teams is a great way to collaborate on that information and make sure that everybody has access to the right resources and the most up-to-date versions of those resources for sharing. And then a slightly more advanced scenario would be to digitize key government operations, whether that's a government-to-citizen outreach program or some data collection or even an alerting system, and bring that management capability as an application into Teams. Here's an example of how you might do that with Power BI. Have a government information Power BI dashboard embedded inside Teams so it's available directly for the staff who need to manage and operate that. I recently talked to a city government in Asia that is very deep into Power BI and into Teams. And so they embedded their citizen information Power BI dashboard right into Teams in a channel along with all the other teams and channels that they have. It's a really cool scenario for them. Here's some other real-world examples. GovTeams is a cross-agency collaboration effort in Australia that creates a platform for employees of different federal and state-level government agencies to come together and collaborate. Very powerful concept to enable that common platform despite being in technically different government agencies. And then two other examples. One, in Taiwan, the Legislative Yuan, the Li Fa Yuan, has prepared a contingency plan to move their meetings into Teams, obviously to enable some social distancing and deal with potential isolation, and maybe even look at voting. And in Japan, the Supreme Court of Japan, part of the Japan Ministry of Justice, is using Teams to do evidentiary hearings and engaging with external attorneys through the guest access feature in Teams, and eventually go even into document collection and document publishing inside Teams. This is fundamental. This is a big transformation of a core government operation to make it more effective and more accountable for citizens. And these are all out-of-the-box capabilities that are available within Teams. So how does a government get started using Teams? Well, like with some of the other examples, it's really easy to start with meetings and internal functions. Move some staff meetings, some operational cadences into Teams. Use live events. That's a great way to broadcast information out to thousands of employees in different agencies, especially urgent information where you need everybody to be on the same page, understanding the same information at that time. Dashboards, like I showed earlier, are a really easy out-of-the-box way to bring data directly to the people who need to manage and collaborate on it. And then later, look at citizen-facing services, kind of like what we have done in healthcare with virtual consults. That same concept could be enabled in a government-to-citizen environment as well. Some resources to look at. We've published a document about cross-agency collaboration. We have a whole site about Microsoft 365 scenarios for government. And one interesting case study using Teams from the Belgian police in Europe. Really cool use of Teams within a very common government function. Before I get into recap, I do want to talk about a few special updates to Teams that are relevant in the current health situation. The first is this crisis communications app. This is useful in retail and manufacturing, pretty much any industry, as a way to reach out to different employees give them relevant information to the current crisis that's going on, and give them the opportunity to check in and share their status, which is essential both for business continuity and also employee well-being. This is a Power Apps app that's freely available and integrated into Teams. And there's a link there that you can click on to get that app and get started. There are some other crisis management strategies for teams that we would recommend in industries like retail and manufacturing and healthcare. Of course, moving all meetings online, using urgent messages effectively to reach staff, using shifts, not just for hourly shifts, but also to manage absences and track whether or not people are able to work from home during this time. Live events, again, is a great way to do town hall meetings, and we hear every day success stories from our customers who are doing that to reach out to their employees quickly and uniformly at this time. And then one cool thing in the picture there is the idea of doing a remote store visit. Store visits are an important part of a retail operation. Going on site nowadays may not be the best practice, but you can always do that remotely with recording. So now you actually have something that's a little better than going there in person. We have some links down there at the bottom about remote working with Teams and the availability of Teams for free, so you can make sure you get started very quickly using Teams. So just to recap, some of the product features were listed today, or were presented today on this slide. I'm not going to list every single one, but you can see that we really covered a full spectrum of core Teams capabilities when talking about industry scenarios. These are all basic common features available to anybody. We also talked about some industry-specific features in Teams, whether that's the Patients app for healthcare or walkie-talkie for retail or maybe manufacturing, shifts and tasks, especially for hourly workers or distributed operations, virtual consults for healthcare. Praise is a great way to connect and support first-line workers and, frankly, information workers. I don't mind getting the occasional praise if I've deserved it. And secure messaging to make sure that the information you share, whether it's patient data or product data, is highly secure. Class Notebook and assignments and grading and education, two more great apps built into Teams for industries. So we talked about a few different industries: retail, manufacturing, healthcare, education, and government. That's just a small slice of the pie. There are great team scenarios in financial services, professional services, airlines, hospitality, and so on. Many of those use the same features that I talked about earlier: chat, team collaboration, online meetings, live events, application integration, tasks, shifts, and so on. And you can very easily imagine how those could be applicable within your organization, even if you're not in one of those industries I listed. General guidance on next steps, of course, start with some common scenarios like meetings or project management. Scale up to very, kind of tailored industry-specific scenarios, whether it's task management or shifts or maybe the Patients app for healthcare. And then reach out to Microsoft. We're here to help with onboarding, with application development, connecting you with partners, training opportunities, and more. Some links on the right. Start using Teams today for free. Call Fast Track. Fast Track will help you deploy your users and get configured and connected right away in Teams. It's a free service from Microsoft. And lastly, we have a Teams adoption guide, which will help you get started and get your employees ramped up very quickly into Teams. Thank you very much for joining and listening to this session on Microsoft Teams for Industries, and I hope to see you all in Teams shortly.